I don't crush people for sport, but when my own mother stood up in a courtroom and screamed that I was mentally unstable, I made an exception. Let me back up. I was 31 years old, running a mid-sized financial consulting firm I had built from scratch over 7 years when my marriage fell apart. Not dramatically, not with screaming or plates thrown across the kitchen. It dissolved quietly, the way a sugar cube does in hot water. One morning my husband just wasn't there anymore, and the space he left behind was somehow both enormous and completely expected. What I didn't expect was my family taking his side. My mother had never liked me the way she liked my younger sister. I knew that the way you know the weather is going to turn bad, not from the forecast, just from how the air feels. My sister was soft and warm and laughed at all the right moments. I was the one who asked too many questions, who pushed back at the dinner table, who had opinions about things my mother thought women shouldn't have opinions about. She called it difficult. I called it being alive. When I divorced, my mother called it my fault. "You're too cold," she told me on the phone, 3 days after I filed the papers. "You always were. No man wants to come home to a woman who runs spreadsheets in her head." I didn't argue. I had a 6-year-old son named I'll call him my boy because that's all he needs to be in this story. And I had a business to keep standing. And I had exactly zero emotional bandwidth left for my mother's editorial opinions on my personality. What I didn't know then was that she had already begun talking to my ex-husband's lawyer. My son's 7th birthday was on a Saturday in early April. I had been planning it for 2 months. Nothing over the top. He wanted a dinosaur cake and a backyard barbecue and for his grandmother to be there, because despite everything, despite all of it, he loved her. Kids do that. They love people who don't deserve it with a ferocity that makes you want to look away because it's too honest. I had invited my mother. I had invited my sister and her husband. I had sent the invitations 6 weeks in advance, called twice to confirm, and even asked my boy to leave a voicemail for his grandmother himself, because I thought she might actually show up for him, if not for me. She said she would come. The Saturday arrived cold and bright, one of those April days that can't quite decide what it wants to be. I had the dinosaur cake. I had the streamers. I had his little friends from school, 5 of them running around the backyard like the world was infinite and they owned all of it. My boy was wearing a green shirt because he said dinosaurs were green, and his hair was doing the thing it always does, sticking up slightly on the left side no matter how many times I smoothed it down. At noon, I texted my mother, "We're starting soon." At 12:30, my sister's number went to voicemail. At 1, my boy came up to me while I was cutting the cake and asked very quietly, so his friends wouldn't hear, "Are they coming?" I told him they were probably just running late. He looked at the driveway. He looked back at me. Did they forget? I said no, absolutely not. They didn't forget. I said it with the conviction I use when I'm closing a deal and I need the other party to believe something before it's technically true yet. But by 2 o'clock, I knew. They hadn't forgotten. They had simply decided he wasn't worth the drive. I put on the brightest version of myself for the rest of that afternoon. I played dinosaur games and lost on purpose, and watched my boy laugh so hard he got cake frosting on his ear. And I kept that brightness going until every last child had been picked up by their parents, and the backyard was just the 2 of us and the leftover streamers, going soft in the late afternoon wind. After he fell asleep that night, I sat at my kitchen table and I let myself feel it. Not for long. 20 minutes maybe. I gave myself exactly that. Then I opened my laptop. I had been the one to support my sister's husband when his restaurant started failing. Not emotionally, financially. He had come to me 2 years earlier with a story about a location problem and a bad lease, and all he needed was a bridge to get to the next quarter, and I had written a check because he was family, and I believed in giving people the chance to get back on their feet. The loan was informal. No documentation because my mother said that was how family did things, and I had been naive enough to agree. $80,000. A number I had not forgotten, though apparently everyone else had. I also knew, because money is my actual profession and not just my hobby, that my sister's husband had not used that $80,000 to save the restaurant. I knew because the restaurant had closed anyway and because I had, over the past 18 months, quietly done what I do for a living, followed the money. I had paper trails. I had records. I had the kind of documentation that makes lawyers go very still when they look at it. I had been sitting on all of it because he was family, and I had kept telling myself that families work things out. But my boy had asked me if they forgot, and they had, and I was done. I did not call anyone. I didn't send an angry text. I wrote one email. Calm, professional. The kind I write when I'm telling a client something they don't want to hear. And I attached the relevant documents. I sent it to my sister's husband directly. And I CC'd my mother, because I thought she should see who she had chosen over her grandson's birthday. The email said simply that I would be filing a civil claim for repayment of the $80,000 with documented interest, and that I'd also identified several financial irregularities in the handling of the restaurant funds that I would be referring to the appropriate authorities unless the matter was resolved privately first. Then I closed my laptop and went to sleep. My mother called me 11 times the next morning. I let all 11 go to voicemail and made my boy his Sunday pancakes. He likes them with the blueberries cooked in, not on top. And we watched cartoons on the couch until noon. It was a good morning, actually. One of those mornings that feels sealed off from everything outside. When I finally listened to the voicemails, they went in a clear progression. The first 3 were my mother being outraged on my sister's husband's behalf. The middle 4 were her pivoting to guilt. How could I do this to the family? What was wrong with me? This wasn't who she raised. The last 4 were something else entirely. Threatening. She used words I won't repeat here. She said things about my fitness as a mother, about my mental stability, about a conversation she claimed to have had with my ex-husband's lawyer. That last part made me stop the playback. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called my own lawyer. What I hadn't known, what I discovered over the next 2 weeks, as the pieces came together in the way they always do when you start asking the right questions, was that my mother had been in communication with my ex-husband's legal team for almost 4 months. She had been providing them with what she characterized as evidence of my instability, emails she had screenshotted out of context, a conversation she had apparently recorded without my knowledge, her own affidavit, which she had signed and submitted, describing me as erratic, controlling, and unfit. My ex-husband was going back to court to revisit our custody arrangement. My mother was his star witness. I want to be honest here, because I think dishonesty in these moments is what makes everything worse. When I found out, I did not feel betrayal first. I felt something colder than that. Recognition, maybe. The sense of a pattern finally showing its whole shape after years of only seeing pieces. She had never been on my side. Not when I started my business and she told me I was being selfish. Not when I got divorced and she told me I was too cold. And not now, when she had looked at her grandson's birthday and decided she had somewhere better to be, something more important to do, someone more worth showing up for. I had always known it. I had just kept hoping I was wrong. My lawyer was calm and methodical, the kind of person who seems almost bored by things that would make other people's hands shake, which is exactly the quality you want in a lawyer when things are genuinely bad. She reviewed everything: the affidavit, the alleged recording, the communications with my ex-husband's legal team. She looked up from the documents and said, "They made a significant strategic error." I asked her what she meant. "They assumed you'd be on the defensive," she said. "But you're a forensic accountant in everything but name. You have documentation they clearly didn't know existed, and your mother just put herself in front of a judge under oath." She paused. "What does she do for a living?" I told her my mother had until recently been a co-signer on my sister's husband's business accounts. My lawyer smiled. It was a small, contained smile, but I noted it. The hearing was set for a Thursday. I dressed the way I dress for important meetings, not to intimidate but to be completely unambiguous. Dark blazer, the good shoes, hair back. My ex-husband came in with his lawyer looking confident in that particular way that men look confident when they think they're about to win something. My mother sat in the gallery and did not look at me. The custody modification request hinged almost entirely on my mother's affidavit and her testimony. When she took the stand and began to speak, she did what she always does: she performed. My mother is a gifted performer. She has warmth when she needs it, and tears when she needs those. She described me in terms that I won't dignify by repeating, and she did it with the conviction of someone who has told a story so many times she has started to believe it. My lawyer waited until the performance was over. Then she stood up and she said, "I'd like to ask you about the business accounts associated with your son-in-law's restaurant." The room changed. I can't explain it better than that. The air in the room simply changed. By the time my lawyer finished, the judge had heard about the loan, the paper trail, the co-signed accounts, and a series of transactions that raised questions my mother could not answer. The affidavit, held up against the financial documentation I had brought, began to look like exactly what it was: a last-ditch attempt to create a narrative before a worse narrative could surface. The judge looked at my ex-husband's lawyer. "Do you honestly not know," she said slowly, "who this woman sitting across from you is?" The lawyer said he wasn't sure he understood the question. "She's a financial investigator," the judge said. "She's been building this case for 18 months. Your witnesses submitted an affidavit in a proceeding involving the same person who holds their financial records." She set down the document. "Motion denied." My ex-husband went white. My mother, in the gallery, looked at me for the first time that day. I didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, my lawyer squeezed my arm once and said she'd be in touch about the civil claim. I thanked her and walked to my car, and I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with my hands folded in my lap. Not doing anything, not calling anyone, just letting the stillness settle. My boy was at school. In 4 hours, I would pick him up and we would stop for ice cream, because we always stop for ice cream on Thursdays, and he would tell me something about dinosaurs that I already know, but will pretend to learn fresh. And the afternoon would be ordinary and good and exactly what it was supposed to be. My sister called me that evening. Not my mother. My sister. She called and she didn't say much, just that she was sorry about the birthday, that she should have shown up, that she knew that. I could tell she had been crying. I could also tell she was standing somewhere apart from her husband while she made the call. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't, not yet. Maybe not for a while. But I told her I heard her, and that meant something, and she said she knew, and we stayed on the line a little longer without saying much. Some bridges don't have to burn. Some just need to go cold for a season before you find out whether they'll hold weight again. My mother has not called since the hearing. The civil claim is still pending. My lawyer says the documentation is strong. I'm not doing it for the money, $80,000 matters, but it's not what this is about. It's about my boy asking if they forgot, and the answer being yes, and the world needing to understand that yes has consequences. He turned 7, surrounded by friends and a dinosaur cake, and a mother who showed up. That is the thing I will always be able to say. And on the days when I wonder if I was too hard, too cold, too much of what my mother always said I was, I think about him smoothing frosting off his ear and laughing, completely unaware of what I was holding off in the background so he could just be 7. That's the job. I'm good at my job. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the courtroom, not the judge's words, but my boy's face when he asked me if they forgot. That small, careful voice, the way he was already trying to protect me from the answer before I gave it. That question is what everything else was built on. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not the legal mechanics, but the deeper logic underneath it. My mother made a choice, and that choice had weight. Not because I assigned it weight, but because choices always do. She decided that showing up for a 7-year-old's birthday mattered less than whatever alliance she had made with my ex-husband's team. She decided that her version of me, cold, unstable, difficult, was more useful to her than the truth. And she acted on that, consistently over months with real effort. That kind of sustained dishonesty has its own gravity. It pulls things toward it. Eventually, it pulled her into a courtroom under oath in front of a judge who had my financial documentation in her hands. That's not luck. that's just consequence. What I know about doing the right thing, and I don't say this lightly, because I spent years wondering if I was actually as cold as she said, is that it is rarely dramatic in the moment. It looks like sending the invitations even when you suspect they won't come. It looks like not retaliating for 18 months because you keep hoping people will be better. It looks like showing your boy that you show up, even when the people who were supposed to show up for you didn't. Integrity doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates, quietly, and then one day a judge looks across a courtroom and the accumulation is visible to everyone in the room. The intelligence part is something I'm still sitting with. I was good at my work. I knew how to follow money, how to read documents, how to see what people were trying to hide. But the real intelligence, the kind that mattered, was knowing when to use what I had and when to wait. I had those financial records for a long time. I didn't use them out of anger. I used them when my son asked me if they forgot, because that was the moment I understood that patience without action isn't wisdom, it's just delay. And the part that nobody tells you about getting through something like this is how much of it is just endurance, not bravery. Bravery implies you weren't afraid. I was afraid, plenty, but I made the pancakes anyway. I smoothed his hair down anyway. I went into that courtroom in the good shoes anyway. Endurance is what you do when fear is present and the thing still needs doing. My sister called that evening. She was sorry. I told her I heard her. Some things take time to repair. Some things you just have to let be cold for a while and see what survives. My boy doesn't know the full story yet. Someday I'll tell him, the version that's appropriate for whatever age he is when he needs it. What I want him to understand, eventually, is that the people who love you correctly will show up. Not perfectly, but they will be there when it counts. And when they fail, they will call you afterward and say so. He deserves to know that. He deserves to see it modeled, not just told. That's still the job. I'm still good at it.